on Battlestar Galactica.
Of all the toys I got to work on while I was with Mattel for about a decade, one of the coolest was doing a hoverboard. A hoverboard from Back to the Future Part 2, one of my absolute favorite films. And while we did everything we could to build up excitement for this and make it as screen accurate as possible, well, even talking to the fans and the filmmakers, there were like 27 different hoverboards in the movie. So even when Bob Gale, the producer and writer of the film, came out to show us these, it was only adding to the confusion because there were so many variations. And we knew there was absolutely no way to please everyone. But regardless of the controversy of all of the details between 27 different props, we were successful and made a prop replica, including a really cool fake box. Well, I mean, it was a real box, but we made it look like it was a box sold at retail, as if hoverboards were actually sold, and this was the pink version designed for a little girl, just like Marty steals it from her in the movie. Well, when we revealed the hoverboard at New York Toy Fair for our fan panel, or at our collector press event would be the way to call it, it went over well. Like, it went over really well. Because in the movie, Mattel made the hoverboard. They slapped a Mattel logo on it without asking Mattel's permission. But hey, why not? It wasn't exactly the right Mattel logo. It had too many spikes. I think it had like 80, and Mattel's was supposed to have 65. But that's not the point. The point is, the hoverboard made a huge splash, and it became the #2 driver for the entire company at New York Toy Fair. Now, let me tell you, that's huge, because New York Toy Fair puts out all sorts of, giant product for huge brands, and sales and management is very focused on price to sales ratio. So the challenge was put forth: how do we anniversary this PR driver where one item can outshine core brands, Barbie, Hot Wheels? Well, we looked at two major candidates. We looked at doing a proton pack from Ghostbusters, and we looked at doing a Castle Grayskull playset. At the end of the day, well, the Castle, being Mattel's homegrown brand, won the day, and because it was, within Mattel's core competencies to make playsets. We also looked at things and presented to management how the Castle was so recognizable within the brand, and then had to show, well, if we're going to do a Castle, which Castle do we make? Looking at lots of different versions throughout the history of the brand, both official versions, fan-made, inspiration, different animation versions, and of course we really heavily looked at the original toy, because that's what Classics was all about. Classics was about finding ways to take the toys we had as a kid and sort of make the ultimate version of them. So part of the presentation to management of how we were going to anniversary or replicate the PR drive and sales volume of one SKU with the hoverboard, and we showed tons of artwork from different iterations, really looking at the origins of the Castle and some of the early artwork, as well as the early prototype for the original Castle, which did differ from the version we all had. And there have been full 3D versions done of some of this artwork. In fact, it's become kind of a life of its own, finding ways to take concept art for different toy lines. So while it originally started off as a sort of fortress that hid a interdimensional portal, obviously as the story changed, it became the source of power for Eternia, and something that was a source of He-Man's power. There were a lot of things in the original version, though, that didn't make it into the product that we all had as kids, like the torture chamber and that giant moat that was a map, if you will, that the castle would sit on. You could cut that out of the inside of the box. And, of course, things like the pawn on top of the castle, while shown in lots of early artwork, and the elongated drawbridge, again, in the early mini-comics and a lot of the prototype shots, you can see the physical differences between the castle and the final version. Another one is that ledge pointing out right there that shows up in all of the early art, like the mini-comics. That ledge was not on the final toy. It had to be removed in order to have the dimensions of the toy fit in the box. But photos of the prototype showed up in both advertising and in early prelim design work. So we looked at all of this because we knew this was our chance to make the greatest Castle Grayskull playset ever. And the hoverboard success is what opened the door to that, and we weren't going to say no. Previously, we thought we were going to have to wait for a movie year to do this in order to fit it onto a planogram at retail and unlock that huge tooling bill. But this time we had an opportunity and we weren't going to lose it. So the question became, how close do we get to the early concept version? Do we go full concept? Do we go a mix between the concept version and the toy, looking at the artwork? And that's sort of what it wound up being. We also really wanted to look at all of the different features that were, I guess, well, not just well known from the castle, but in a way had become part of pop culture itself. The jaw bridge, the trap door, which was actually a copyright, not copyright, but it was actually patented by Mattel. So they had a patent on the trapdoor mechanism. And the jaw bridge being able to open with a sword, as shown in a lot of the early comics and content. So yeah, there was a lot of work that had to go into this, and a lot of phone calls and meetings with the Horsemen about how we were going to do this. And all of this work was being done without any guarantee that this product was ever going to make it to the market. This was done with so much love for the brand by so many artists and designers and sculptors, packaging designers, all for love of the brand, because this was on top of our regular workload. This was not sort of, an official assignment. This was sort of like, hey, we're going to give you this huge challenge. But of course, we loved He-Man and we loved Masters of the Universe. And working with the Horsemen, we all together as a team came up with a blueprint or a B-sheet of what features could go into the castle that we could afford at the price point we wanted to hit. But man, to say we were throwing darts is not even, doing it justice, because we were doing this by the skin of our teeth. There was no precedent for this. Nowadays, we have things like HasLab, and even Mattel has Mattel Creations now that they do this with a lot of corporate support. When we were creating this, we were doing it very much on our own kind of little island, figuring out how we could make this work. And a lot of things like the Talon Fighter landing pad or the Ghost of Grayskull that was going to be a little thing to click on at the top all had to go because...
Oh, I don't know. I'm making this up as I go.
And when the final version came out and it didn't quite match the blueprints, well, yeah, of course there was going to be people upset over this, and we were doing everything we could to make it match as close as possible, even though we had absolutely no precedent and no framework for how to basically design a giant playset that we didn't even have approved tooling for. And we wanted to do homage to the original, the prototype. So many detailed conversations. How do we do, for example, the blaster, the gun on top of the castle? Do we make it look like the prototype, or do we make it look like the toy? And same thing with the dungeon. We really wanted to do this as a 3D element, but we found, well, not super quickly, but over time, that it was going to cost more than the cost of an articulated figure due to so much paint that had to be applied to this, which meant it had to be a sticker like the original. And this was very disappointing. We did not want to make this cut. But unfortunately, in order to keep the castle at the cost that we were advertising it to, we had to we were working backwards into that, because we were putting out a cost without having a final cost for how much the product was going to be, which meant it had to be cost reduced as we went, which meant things like the dungeon grate as a 3D painted element unfortunately had to go. And believe me, no one wanted to do a bait and switch with anyone. Same thing with the Stygian moat. We had really wanted to do this even as a cutout from the box, but resources were very tight. And it was frustrating because we wanted to make this possibly the greatest toy ever. And while I think we did a good job, and I'm really proud of how the final version came out, the lack of a blueprint to do this type of project, which again, HasLab does this every month now, and they have a lot of corporate support. We were out on our own island, literally making this up as we went. Finding out that He-Man had to fit inside the castle drawbridge, so we had to lower it. So many of these things were happening on the fly as we went, simply because we were breaking new ground. We were doing something that no one had really ever done before at a huge, major toy company. When you look at something, again, like HasLab, what Hasbro does, you can tell they have a huge amount of support from top management. They had access to 3D modeling and all of this PR and a budget to do all this PR. We didn't have any of that. We basically had sort of a, almost a dare, like, hey, can you do something that will bring just as much PR as the castle? Because again, when your one item, the hoverboard, does better than Barbie and Hot Wheels and Fisher Price at New York Toy Fair, management notices and like, what the heck? This wasn't supposed to be our New York Toy Fair driver. So we went forward working to sell it in, and again, with very little resources, it meant showing cardboard cutout models on a empty cube. Now, we did do it. The fans absolutely stepped up and made this happen. But man, I wish we could have shown them more or had more assets. Again, I keep going to HasLab with some of their 3D modeling. I wish we could have done that. But, this was almost 20 years ago. And it was very groundbreaking, and it was a very, very different process from everything else the company does. Mattel is so used to a set process, selling it into retailers. Retailers place their order. That unlocks the tooling. Here we were sculpting something, and we didn't even know if we had the tooling budget to make it happen. But, like I said, the fans made it happen. This could not have happened without the passionate MOTU fans, and so grateful because we had way more we wanted to do for them, like letting them choose the characters that were going to be on the box art and doing all sorts of bonuses, hoping that whatever we did, however we came together to partner with the fans, we could make this the best Castle Grayskull ever. And come back next time and we'll jump in for one last Grayskull video talking about the actual product, the features, the size, the cost, the tooling. It's all coming to you.